Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Freedom of the Media Initiative kickoff, announcing the annual conference to address issues of media freedoms, particularly in the Eastern, Southeast Europe, Mediterranean, the Middle East, and the Gulf. From improvements in legal assistance for protection of journalists to role of social media in disseminating news, support for the independent reporting, often challenged by the autocratic rule in some countries in these regions, to addressing phenomena of a cancel culture and fake news, and ramifications of those in a digital age. With this initiative, we intend to further this dialogue with you all. We, though, remain continuously aware and conscious of a need to remain vigilant here in the United States and in the other democracies to protect and preserve the freedoms of the media to which these societies committed to. I'm very thrilled to welcome and express our gratitude to President of National Press Club, Lisa Nicole Matthews, who lended her support for us to organize this event, first inaugural event at the National Press Club premises. And above all, I also want to thank the great people at this club who really worked so well with us. And hopefully, as we move into 2022, we hope to hold the second gala dinner and award ceremony again in these premises. I want to thank our staff, Aria Schwartz, program coordinator, our fellow Jason Moyer, and research assistants, Rachel Kaufman, Isabel Semler, and Ben DeKisto for their great work in putting this event together. You have the brochures in front of you, so we don't need to do an announcement of the biographies. And that said, we start our first panel with Emily Wilkins from Bloomberg Government as a moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thank you for organizing this today. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. As Sasha mentioned, my name is Emily Wilkins. I am a congressional and campaigns reporter with Bloomberg Government. And the National Press Club, I know, is excited to play host to the inaugural Freedom of the Media Gala Dinner and Awards Ceremony. I just want to take a quick minute, just note that the Press Club has been very much involved with press freedom. We have really stood firm in our commitment to press freedom. We helped bring attention to Jason Rezaian during his confinement in an Iranian prison. We helped play a role in his release. We have spent years advocating for the freedom of Austin Tice, an award-winning freelance journalist who was kidnapped in Syria. And just last month, we awarded our annual John Obeshon Press Freedom Award, recognizing journalists who try and find the truth in difficult circumstances. The good news is that one recipient, Danny Fenster, shortly after he received the award, was freed from prison in Myanmar. We'd like to think that was based on the award, but obviously that was a huge effort. The bad news is that the other recipient, Bloomberg reporter Hayes Fan, who was detained by the Beijing National Security Bureau exactly 1 year ago today. And today marks that anniversary of the last time she was seen. I know we both at Bloomberg and at the Press Club are going to continue to fight for her release. And we are grateful to have an event tonight with these absolutely amazing panelists to continue to shed light on press freedom. I'm not going to take the time, because I want to get right to our amazing panelists, to go over their incredibly impressive bios. But if you are not immediately impressed with everyone on this stage, please go read their bios. It's really fantastic. Including our panel are Mujo Selimović, publisher of the Oslobodjenje Media Group in Bosnia, Natalie Sadletska, an award-winning journalist with Radio Free Ukraine and editor-in-chief and host of the show Schemes, Corruption in Detail, and Phil LaVelle, the Director of Public Affairs for the U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, also known as SIGAR. Well, thank you to all our panelists. I wanted to sort of start with a bit of a broader question and sort of give you the chance to add any additional details about yourselves or your work. But I just wanted to start by asking about the biggest issues that you are facing in your roles with your news organizations from the perspective of press freedom. And Natalie, I know you had a few things that you wanted to say, so I want to make sure to start with you first.
Thank you, Emily. Hello. Good evening, colleagues. I would like, first of all, to thank Transatlantic Leadership Network. It's a big honor for me to be here. My name is Natalie Sadletska. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine, and my team is producing back home a weekly investigative television program called Schemes, and it is done with the support of the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And our activity is dedicated to providing balanced but hard-hitting investigative reporting in a country which is only in a transition to democracy. What it is like to be an investigative reporter in Ukraine, I'd like to shed some light on obstacles that the media has in our country and my fellow journalists are facing. Most of Ukrainian media are owned or by oligarchs or by politicians, and these media are taken, unfortunately, as a tool to protect their own political or business interests. And another big part of media on the Ukrainian media landscape is influenced by Russian money. But there are some kind of islands of independent journalism, mostly supported by the Western financial support. Some of them are supported with conscious audience donations. And such independent media play a very important role and have a very strong impact on a political and social scene in our country. Which is great, and I think it is a result of a really continued struggle to achieve this. In a country where the law enforcement system is corrupted, where the judicial system is corrupted, the independent investigative journalism became a strong force to bring power to an account. But active civil society and investigative reporters, unfortunately, are still being perceived by those empowered as enemies who are trying to insecure their current way of life. Thus, there are still many cases of manhunt, persecution of activists, and also illegal intimidation and interference for independent journalistic work. What's even more disturbing that such crimes are rarely being punished, and as it is known, an impunity breeds even more violence. Starting from journalist Georgi Gongadze's murder in the year 2000, and then journalist Pavel Sheremet murder in 2015, together with dozens and hundreds of reporters who were killed or injured or attacked or intimidated in Ukraine, names of those who ordered these crimes have still not been named. Even such crime as our car, Schemes team car, was burned in an arson attack just last year. And we actually still don't know who ordered this crime. No names are being named officially. But it is true that independent journalism became a very important force in fighting corruption. And it is also multiplied by the effect of some reforms that were made after the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine, and with the Western support and under the pressure, of course, of local, very active community and society, Ukraine has opened access to many different registries. It's launched an assets declaration system for officials, which really helps to prevent corruption in Ukraine. And new anti-corruption law enforcement bodies were established, and many reforms were done with the help of the Western world. And my country appreciates all the support that we continue receiving from the United States, including support for journalists, support for civil society, support for democratic transitions of law enforcement, judicial system, which are still ongoing, of course. But Russia is not giving up in preventing Ukraine's aspirations towards democracy. Now we all are very disturbed as the Kremlin has been moving troops towards the border of Ukraine while demanding guarantees that Ukraine will not join NATO. And during the last years, you might have seen as Ukrainian soldiers have been courageously protecting Ukraine's pro-European and pro-Western aspirations. This choice is made. But given the growing danger we are facing from Russia, Ukrainians would hope and appreciate having all possible defense-related support, and of course also looking forward for the Western world to enforce all decisive instruments to deter Russian aggression. But besides physical intrusion, of course, Moscow is continuously trying to weaken Ukraine from inside through weakening our institutions, using corruption as a poison. And that is why Western support aimed to strengthen not leaders, but institutions in Ukraine is very important. And I just want to say the transitional period from socialism to vibrant democracy takes generations, but Ukraine is at the point where there is no return. And on that path, long-term support and partnership of other democracies is crucial for the success of such a transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mujo, I don't know if you want to also take a stab at talking a little bit, and feel free to add anything in addition about your media group, as well as the challenges, sort of the biggest ones that you're facing in terms of press freedom.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, TLN, to be able to speak here and give my contribution to the subject in front of this audience. I think what Natalie said is pretty much the same in Bosnia, with some difference that there is most of the media is controlled by the governments. There is not so much oligarch controls media, but also I'm not finding so many medias which is really independent and free because of various reasons. Unfortunately, Bosnia it's highly corrupted country, and I'm in media from 2002, 2003, almost 18 years, lucky me, as a publisher. And I have to say that situation now, comparing, let's say, 15 years ago, it's better. We've seen this through, let's say, even our work. We've been exposing a number of the cases, and when we started to expose, through the newspapers, web portals, TV, when we started to expose the cases, of course, that we received, and we were facing a number of the pressures, both from the governments and interested parties, which are controlled by the governments. And when we started this, myself and most of the people working in editorial production of content, they said they've been advised that drop it, don't do it. You can't change anything. It's like the system is too corrupted. It's so deep roots that you cannot clean up. It just fights against windmills and so on. But it's not entirely correct. We're now seeing that some progress has been made, and for instance, there are a few cases which we were exposing maybe 10 years ago. And now they're coming under the, let's say, treatment of judicial system. So what I want to say, as I said, we're fighting same animals: corruption, high corruption, media control, oppressing of the journalists and the publishers. But luckily, situation is slowly improving in Bosnia. I'm talking about Bosnia now, not other part of West Balkan. It's a bit more complicated, especially situation in Serbia. But I would like to stay with Bosnia to be correct. And the main message is that pushing the right things, fighting and vouching for the things which is good for society, fighting against corruption and crime, it's not fast results, it's not pay off immediately, but it's if you are steady pushing it in positive way, the results are coming sooner or later.
Before I move to Phil for his thoughts, I just wanted to see, you said things have gotten a lot better in the last 15 years for...
No, comparing to last 15 years.
Compared to the last...
So last 5 years, I think situation is improving. It's improving a lot comparing to the... Because also the system is changing and, you know, there is more, let's say, active judicial system in positive way, but still a long way to go.
Absolutely. And Phil, I know you also have a very unique perspective on news and news organizations, and so I just want to pose the exact same question to you. What you think some of the biggest impediments to press freedom are right now, from what you've seen in your work with Afghanistan?
Well, first I want to congratulate our award winners, and thank you for having me here. And I feel kind of like a hitchhiker here because I'm a recovering journalist. I'm on what's known as the dark side now. But I work a lot with foreign correspondents. And what I wanted to talk about is the importance of American press maintaining foreign bureaus and keeping a focus on the international community. Mark Twain said that, or he wrote that God created war so that Americans would learn geography. And I think that might be true because on American television, with some exceptions. I mean, there are some fantastic correspondents out there, but some of the American networks, I learn more about the British royal family than I do foreign countries until they get to a crisis point. And I think that's a shame. And part of the reason, I think, from what I've seen in Afghanistan, is you have only 1% of the U.S. population serving in the military. And so most Americans did not have skin in the game. And the United States spent billions and billions and billions of dollars and lost people over there. And so I don't want to be too dark about that because the fact is that the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, the Associated Press, Radio Free Europe had a long time presence in Kabul and elsewhere in Afghanistan. National Public Radio, my friend Tom Bowman went there many times. NPR lost somebody. AP and Reuters have lost people. So I just think it's very important as the world's leading democracy for us to not lose sight of that. And I used to work at a newspaper, and when I first joined the San Diego Union a long time ago, they had foreign correspondents. Didn't last long. That was back in the 90s because those things cost money. Particularly in a war zone. So I see a different threat, the threat of indifference. And so my message would be, if there's any publishers out there or executive producers, I would say keep the heat on and let's keep covering the world and not become so insular that we don't follow the world, we don't report on the world.
Absolutely, and I think you all made very excellent points, and I'm hoping to go back to a couple of them throughout the discussion. And please, I hope we can treat this a little bit like a conversation. If another panelist says something and you think that's very interesting, we're all journalists, well, journalists/former journalists here. We all know how to ask a good question and jump in on a good point. But I wanted to start off by bringing back to a point that Natalia mentioned, as far as the assistance for U.S. and other countries when it comes to press freedom. I was looking at the World Press Freedom Index from Reporters Without Borders. Ukraine is listed as problematic. Both Afghanistan and Bosnia are ranked as bad. The worst is very bad. And I'm wondering, just for any of you, what role you think countries like the U.S. and other nations need to play in making sure that there is strong press freedom internationally?
If I may, as I said, I'm in media 18 years, and you can imagine what we're facing in these 18 years. I mean, as a publisher, but also as a journalist. But I will not touch this. What I've figured out, I mean, through the experience, it's not through any kind of like deep analysis. If you want to if you want to preserve media freedom, you have to be financially stable and financially independent. Financial independence and financial stability maybe is not always the same thing, because you can be financially stable by receiving money from somebody who is interested in party, whether it's political parties or business parties, and then you are not independent. You are financially stable but not independent. But financial stability and financial independency, I think it's one of the most important tool, let's say, in this way, to preserve media freedom. Because if you're, let's say, under oppression of the, interesting party, governments, policymakers, and you are not able, because of, they have a lot of tools to make your life miserable, and they're very creative in this, I would say. And if you're not able to, let's say, put it bluntly, give people salaries, cover your costs, then you have to make compromises. Or you have to find somebody who will help you out, let's say. The question is why somebody will help you out, because always is behind everything is some kind of interest. This is my point, actually, and coming to your question is United Nations, US, and the international community can help tremendously, and it was helping since years to all Balkan and West Balkan medias, mainly through the grants and NGO support, supporting certain media outlets in the way that they're giving money for addressing topics like corruption, human rights, women's rights, and so on. But this, let's say, these media outlets were alive as long as the support was lasting. What was missing, in my opinion, all these years was missing bit of shifting focus from just financial support, which can be through the education, direct financial support, cooperation, and so on, but also to shift focus more to media sustainability. To ask the question, what happened with those outlets who are on the right way, supporting and vouching for the real values, fighting for the things which is good for all society, but what will happen with those medias in a moment when this support is ending for whatever reason, because budgets are depleted, the program is ending, and so on. So I believe that the international community, US and Europeans, they should keep doing what they're doing. But maybe, as I said, shift focus and ask the questions how to secure media sustainability once the support is, let's say, ending, that this media is still independent, financially stable, and financially sustainable. Only in this way the journalists and people can do their work without any pressure and without any, let's say, debts to anybody. So, and I think it's not an easy question, it's not an easy solution. I mean, it's something that should be addressed, I believe, from case to case, from the market to market, from country to country. It's not, every country is different. But I have a feeling throughout all work that we've been so far with a number of the NGOs, that this question or this target hasn't been addressed as much as should. Now we are working with, and I have to say, we have a program with USAID and Internews, and actually our program that we're working together is how to make media sustainable long-term run without anybody's support. And to fight on the market, which is very challenging. We have global media platforms, we have competitors, we have state media, so the markets, it's very demanding, and now even more than ever before. So how to address these challenges and how to protect media freedom throughout financial stability and financial sustainability.
I think that's a good point, that you do have to compete in many of these countries with the state media, which is obviously has much different funding streams.
Yeah.
Of course.
Natalia?
Yeah, but I think there is no better audience to say that, for example, our anti-corruption reporting, schemes project would not be actually possible without the support of the RFERL, Radio Free Radio Liberty, which is funded by the US. And I hope that for the last years we have many examples of how independent journalism supported by the Western institutions actually kept Ukraine from sliding back to authoritarianism, kleptocracy, and kept Ukraine out of Russian orbits. And many Ukrainian reporters actually are willing to serve to the people's interest, but unfortunately they don't want, unfortunately, the only possibilities they have mostly is to take money from oligarchs and politicians. And so even more financial and other types of support that Mujo mentioned, of course, for such independent and standard-based, which is important, journalism is very needed. Also, you mentioned state media. In Ukraine, for example, there is another important reform that is still going on. The state television channel, state-owned channel, is now in a transition to an independent public broadcaster. That's actually where our program is on air. And there are many obstacles at this process as well, such as open and hidden state pressure, and this probably needs even more attention from Western diplomats. More wide, US personal sanctions against those who violate human rights, those who enrich themselves through corruption schemes were always effective and efficient measures. And again, talking for the media and journalists, of course, such initiatives as Freedom of the Media Award and initiative by TLN give big inspiration for those who are committed to independent journalism and reporting in favor of regular people.
And you mentioned that there was both sort of public pressure and then hidden state pressure. And you said that that should be a little bit more in everyone's focus. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? I mean, is that simply hidden pressure? Is that just private threats directly to journalists, blackmail? What does that look like?
It's about a few things. There is a criminal proceedings, for example, against the management of the company, which tried to keep independent journalism on the channel. That's one thing. Also, it's still state money, so the state is trying to not allocate enough money for the public broadcaster, which makes it's on the verge of survival. And also, there are continuous attempts to make it dependent from the government.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you yourself have been targeted in regards to your phone records, and there was a request, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was found that the request for records was far, far broader than anything they could have possibly needed, that they were trying to get stuff on you that had no relation to the work that you were doing.
Absolutely, and I actually now I can say that I'm so glad that there are European and Western institutions, in my case, such as the European Court on Human Rights, who made a decision in our favor, actually ruling that it was absolutely illegal to gain such wide access to our journalist data, because it could disclose a lot of sources and information about our sources and have a chilling effect on media landscape in Ukraine.
And Phil, I want to tweak the question just a little bit, given your experience. I mean, you have definitely seen local Afghanistan media cover the country, and you've also worked with a lot of international correspondents who covered the country. And I'm wondering if what sort of your big takeaways from that are in terms of locals covering this, trying to cover the same story as people who are flying in from another country, staying there for a short period of time and then leaving.
Well, first I want to acknowledge the brave journalists of Afghanistan. And the United States invested money early on in standing up the Afghan press, but it's really a story of a media that evolved organically with a little bit of help from the West, but it really was something that sprang up in Afghanistan and became a very vibrant free press, unlike anything in that region. Certainly, I think they had a level of freedom. They faced all kinds of dangers. Many of them were killed tragically, and now they're in a terrible situation, and many are in hiding. The Taliban are not known for their press freedoms. So the thing I would say, though, is that it's inspirational to see a country starting basically from zero, because when the Taliban fell in 2002, roughly, give or take a few months, the people that worked in the Afghan press had nothing to go on. They did not come from a society that had known a free press. And so it was really something to see that they would grow organically. And so, but you mentioned Western press or foreign press who were there. Many of them were there for years and know the place very, very well, and some are still there. I mentioned the Post and the Times and the Journal. They're still there. But I think I've strayed from your question. I apologize.
No. I mean, I think I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about how foreign news channels and foreign news organizations, how they covered Afghanistan, if you saw any sort of big differences in how they approached the stories versus.
Well, they bring a Western lens to it, but I do think that to many of the journalists of Afghanistan, I think they look to the West with hope and tried to build an Afghan press in their image, but I think inspired by the West. And, but I mean, if you're talking about some Bigfoot who flies in when there's a big event and then flies back to wherever they're from after a few days or weeks, I mean, that's, to me, it adds to the audience of, it broadens the audience of people consuming news out of Afghanistan, I would think. But, you know, again, I just have so much respect for the folks who are there. As I mentioned, the wire services, the newspapers, and I should mention Al Jazeera, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Stars and Stripes, who probably did it with the least financial support. But I have a question for my distinguished panelists. I wonder, you mentioned financial backing, the financial realities of running a news organization. How much has social media in the last few years broken you free from that element, if at all? And I understand that there's been interference in the social media in your countries, but has it changed the power dynamic at all? Because now everybody can be a publisher.
Well, in my country, in Ukraine, the role of television is still huge. Most of the people actually receive information and rely on information mainly from the big television channels. But you're right, there's already a growing culture of being present on social networks, and a lot of reporters starting to create their own YouTube channels, let's say. But I think in all these situations, what's most important is that we keep standards and such as balance and so on. You know, I really think that it's the most important thing. We have to, you know, use the standards policy as a navigation, and sometimes it's not like that.
In Bosnia, it's, of course, now, as you said, everybody producing content, and every single person, it's media for yourself. You know, we have, like everywhere, number of the bloggers, vloggers, influencers, and all of them are creating some content. But most of this content, it's addressing entertainment. At the same time, there is huge influence on business side from these social networks, because the total size of the market, advertising market, it's certain. In Bosnia, it's very small. It's like 50 million euro for everything. It's a very, very small market. And of course, that this social media has tremendous impact on business side of the media. So taking part of the market share, taking part of the cake, reducing for the, let's say, mainstream media. When it comes to the contents itself, and they're usually not very rarely touching subjects which is important for the politics, society, corruption, and so on. They are more on the side for entertainment, young people, which are addressing completely different subjects. We do have this. We also have as a media. We have Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, whatever. So, but this is like more entertainment production. When it comes to the to other influence, when touching, addressing political subjects, corruption, social processes, these medias are still not, let's say, influential in this way. So still the mainstream media, the TV, newspapers, the political portals are the platforms for communicating and addressing any of the important subjects and topics in the country.
It strikes me as very interesting. I just realized this with Phil's question, but I know one thing that the US media is really struggling with right now. We obviously don't have a state-run media, but there are lots of people who are now trying to say that, you know, established news organizations are quote-unquote fake news, that they are not to be trusted, that the reporters all have, you know, ulterior motives, and I imagine that that's something that, you know, certain countries, journalists have struggled with for quite some time. I mean, are there any thoughts that you have as far as how to retaliate is not the right word, but how to sort of stand strong against accusations that what you're reporting and why you're reporting it is not accurate or has a slant to it?
When it comes to our media, I have to be, I mean, maybe a little bit selfish, and I don't want to sound like self-promotions, and I'm not producing content, you know, I'm just a publisher, but I believe, based on perception for media, our people, journalists working in media, they're really doing a great job, because we have 78 years of history of publishing newspapers and being active in the media. And of course, that credibility is everything. We have, like everywhere else, like number of the portals which placing this fake news for various reasons, characters assassinations, creating affairs which doesn't exist, and so on. And this is something that now local regulatory bodies trying to address, how to stop this, but still it's like early phase. In our case, we're fighting this with our credibility and staying and supporting always what is truth, no matter what. Not always is easy. Sometimes takes longer time to convince audience that what our journalists are working, presenting, writing, it's truth. And sometimes, or very often, especially when it comes to addressing corruption, of course, that other sides, they're trying to present us like either fake news or influenced by somebody for some interest. But truth is the truth, you know. After a certain period of time, simply the people recognize what is right, what is wrong.
Our experience is such. We are being regularly attacked by ordered trollers and bot campaigns, you know, because almost any politician in Ukraine has its bot army to protect himself. But our recipe, I would say, is balance. We do take and pay a lot of attention to this standard, and so no one can accuse us that we are biased, because this week we investigate one oligarch, next week we will try to produce a story about another one, and we report about those in power, we report about those in opposition, and this gives our audience understanding that we are actually serving only to them.
I mean, I think those are fantastic answers. I know there are things that I think most journalists strive to, in terms of making sure that you investigate everyone, that you treat everyone fairly, that you stick with the credibility and the facts. And it's good to know that even if it doesn't seem like it's working in the moment, that in the long term, it does play out. We only have a few minutes left. I understand that we are standing in between you and your happy hour, and I don't want to be that person. So, Phil, I'm just going to throw you one last question. We were speaking a little prior to this panel, and you raised the question of exactly how often in the presidential debates for 2020 the word Afghanistan was mentioned. I looked it up. It was mentioned once, and it was not even mentioned in regards to Afghanistan. It was mentioned in regards to Putin. And so, Phil, I just want to see if maybe in the last minute, you could just quickly say what needs to be done to get more Americans to really care about international news, care about foreign news, and just be very much aware of the world outside the US.
Well, that's quite a relief, because I was going to offer to buy the first round upstairs if it was more than a paragraph of a mention. So, well, I go back to the people that run the newsrooms, and you know, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink it, but I think that we need, I'm saying we, I'm not part of we anymore, but the news industry, the people that run the newsrooms need to continue a focus on foreign affairs. Because if all we, I remember years ago, Walter Cronkite was rather upset over the trend toward more entertainment coverage and more crime coverage. And I started out as a night cops reporter out in California at a little newspaper, and crime news is important, but I mean, when it takes on this sort of salacious quality. And I think that we need to, in American newsrooms, still have a focus, a renewed focus on hard news, particularly news from around the world. Because if you, let's say you read the New York Times cover to cover, the Washington Post, you're going to have a good sense, a pretty good sense of what's happening around the world. Or if you're looking at the AP wire, the AP News report. But not so much, you know, American television. And there are some fantastic war correspondents in broadcast, but I know that some of them are frustrated at the news decisions that are made. And so I think that just a renewed focus on what's happening in the world, because we're a part of the world, and we should know what's going on. And there's more to foreign coverage than the royal family. And so that's the end of my snark. I've gone over your time.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists for those great insights and that really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and sharing your thoughts and your extreme expertise. So thank you so much.